One of the things that has been very illustrative of the cracks is the Nick Fuentes issue and the fact that Tucker Carlson hosted Nick Fuentes, who is a white supremacist and a racist and anti-Semite. I mean, all of the ists and the isms, that's what this guy is. And if you just go online and look at some of the things he says, and you'll understand just what I'm talking about. The president, I asked Marjorie Taylor Greene about him, and she just said it's up to Tucker, and she distanced herself from his views. President Trump did not distance himself from Nick Fuentes' views. Listen to what he said.
We've had some great interviews with Tucker Carlson, but you can't tell him who to interview. I mean, if he wants to interview Nick Fuentes, I don't know much about him.
Oh my God, you guys. What I just witnessed is probably the most brutal political takedown I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's going absolutely viral because a liberal streamer just completely destroyed Piers Morgan and exposed Trump's Afghanistan disaster in the most devastating way possible. We're talking about a debate where Morgan thought he had this easy win lined up, ready to blame Biden for the Afghanistan withdrawal mess, and then this guy Destiny just flipped the entire script and left Morgan looking like a deer in headlights. Can you believe this? One of the most pro-Trump media personalities got caught in his own trap and was forced to admit on live television that Trump negotiated the Doha agreement that set up the entire Afghanistan timeline. The look on Morgan's face when he realized he just got played is going viral because you can literally watch him die inside as his own argument gets turned against him. This isn't just some random debate moment. This is a perfect example of how Trump's foreign policy disasters are coming back to haunt his defenders now that he's back in office. The sheer audacity of Morgan trying to rewrite history about Afghanistan while sitting right across from someone who actually did their homework is exactly the kind of intellectual dishonesty that defines Trump's media ecosystem, and watching it blow up in real time is absolutely incredible. So here's what really went down, and this is where it gets absolutely wild. Piers Morgan was doing his usual routine, trying to blame Biden for everything that went wrong in Afghanistan and acting like Trump had nothing to do with the disaster. Morgan was going on and on about how the withdrawal was Biden's fault and how liberals need to stop blaming Trump for Afghanistan. Yeah, like we're supposed to just forget that Trump set the whole thing up in the first place. But then Destiny, who's this liberal political streamer, just comes in with the most perfect trap I've ever seen. He lets Morgan dig himself deeper and deeper into this narrative about how Biden screwed everything up, and then he drops the hammer. Destiny asks the most simple question that completely destroys Morgan's entire argument. Who negotiated that plan? Donald Trump. And Morgan's face just goes completely blank because he knows he's been caught red-handed defending something that Trump actually did. The beauty of this moment is that Morgan walked right into it by being so confident that he could pin everything on Biden. The tactical brilliance of letting your opponent commit fully to a false position before revealing the facts that destroy it is something that more people need to learn when debating Trump supporters who rely on lies and historical revisionism. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
But if he wants to do it, get the word out. Let him, people have to decide. Ultimately, people have to decide.
Now, he did have dinner with Nick Fuentes and Kanye West at Mar-a-Lago, which he was reminded of. I want to show this. This is Nick Fuentes saw what the president said or didn't say, and he said this. Thank you, Mr. President.
I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, for Trump to say, I don't know who he is come on. I mean, this is the leader of his party. This is someone who consumes so much media. And this is something that has been dividing his base so intensely since Tucker Carlson had this interview. So that is just doesn't seem any bit of reality. But also, I guess, not a total surprise. But, the president also talked about, I had dinner with him and Kanye West. Kanye West has also spewed terrible anti-Semitic rhetoric, just like Nick Fuentes. And Trump didn't seem to distance himself from that.
But I think this is indicative of him not wanting to stop the fracture.
But here's where this gets really crazy, and this is the part that shows you just how unprepared these Trump defenders are when someone actually knows the facts. Destiny doesn't just make a general claim about Trump's involvement. He cites specific congressional records from November 2020 that prove Trump negotiated the Doha agreement with the Taliban. He's got the receipts, and Morgan has absolutely no comeback because the evidence is right there in black and white. Come on, when you're going up against someone who's done their homework and you're just repeating talking points, you're going to get embarrassed. And that's exactly what happened to Morgan when Destiny started breaking down the actual timeline of what Trump did in Afghanistan. The congressional testimony shows that Trump planned the troop withdrawal, reducing forces from 13,500 to 2,500 before Biden even took office. So, when Morgan tries to act like Biden created this mess out of nowhere, Destiny just demolishes that narrative with actual facts and documentation. The level of preparation that Destiny brought to this debate versus the lazy talking points that Morgan was recycling shows you exactly why Trump supporters keep getting caught in these kinds of traps. They're so used to operating in information bubbles where nobody challenges their false narratives that they completely fall apart when confronted with actual evidence. And here's the most devastating part of this whole exchange. Destiny doesn't just prove that Trump negotiated the deal, he exposes how terrible the deal actually was. The Doha Agreement completely sidelined the Afghan government and negotiated directly with the Taliban like they were a legitimate government. Trump basically threw America's Afghan allies under the bus and gave the Taliban everything they wanted while getting almost nothing in return. And then, just to make it even worse, Trump pressured the Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners, who then went right back to fighting and helped the Taliban take over the country. Are you kidding me? Trump literally freed Taliban fighters, and then his supporters want to blame Biden when those same fighters helped overthrow the government. The level of hypocrisy and historical revisionism here is absolutely staggering. When you negotiate directly with terrorists while ignoring your allies, force the release of enemy prisoners, and then act shocked when those prisoners help defeat your allies, that's not foreign policy. That's sabotage disguised as diplomacy. What makes this moment so politically explosive is that it completely destroys the narrative that Trump supporters have been pushing about Afghanistan for years. They've been trying to rewrite history and make it seem like Biden was solely responsible for the chaos of the withdrawal, conveniently forgetting that Trump set up the entire timeline and negotiated directly with terrorists. But when you have someone like Destiny who actually knows the facts and can cite specific congressional records, that narrative falls apart immediately. Morgan literally had to admit on his own show that Trump negotiated the Doha Agreement, which completely undermines everything he'd been saying about Biden being the only one to blame. The viral clip of Morgan's reaction is so perfect because you can see the exact moment when he realizes he's been caught in his own hypocrisy. The timing of this takedown is also perfect because it's happening right as Trump is back in office and dealing with his own foreign policy disasters. We've got the Ukraine surrender plan that his own Republican senators are calling a Russian wish list. We've got the Venezuela boat strikes creating international incidents. And now we have this reminder of how Trump's Afghanistan deal was a complete disaster from the beginning. This debate with Destiny is going viral because it shows how Trump's foreign policy record is actually terrible when you look at the facts instead of just listening to the spin from his defenders. But here's what really makes this story important. It's not just about one embarrassing moment for Piers Morgan. This is about accountability and historical truth in an era where Trump supporters are constantly trying to rewrite history to make their guy look better. When Morgan got caught trying to blame Biden for something Trump actually did, that exposes the broader pattern of dishonesty and gaslighting that defines Trump's political movement. They want to take credit for anything good that happens while blaming Democrats for all their own failures. And when someone like Destiny comes along with actual facts and documentation, their entire narrative crumbles. The fact that this is going viral shows that people are hungry for this kind of accountability and fact-checking, especially when it comes to foreign policy disasters that cost American lives and damaged our international reputation. Morgan getting destroyed like this is particularly satisfying because he's been one of the most arrogant Trump defenders in the media, always acting like he's smarter than everyone else while pushing completely false narratives. Alright, so let me walk you through exactly why this Destiny versus Piers Morgan moment is so much more significant than just another viral debate clip, because when you dig into the details of what actually happened here, you realize this is a perfect case study in how Trump's foreign policy disasters are being whitewashed by his defenders, and why it matters that people are finally pushing back with actual facts. And honestly, the more you understand about the Afghanistan situation and Trump's role in creating that disaster, the more obvious it becomes that this kind of accountability moment was long overdue and absolutely necessary to set the record straight. The systematic way that Trump supporters have been rewriting the history of Afghanistan to avoid accountability for their guys' failures represents one of the most successful disinformation campaigns in modern American politics. But moments like this show that their false narratives can be destroyed when someone comes prepared with actual documentation and evidence. First off, let's talk about the specific way that Destiny set up this trap, because it's actually a masterclass in how to debate Trump supporters who rely on talking points instead of facts. Instead of just jumping in with accusations or getting into a shouting match, Destiny let Morgan make his case first. He let Morgan dig himself deeper and deeper into this narrative about how Biden was solely responsible for the Afghanistan disaster and how Trump had nothing to do with it. And then, when Morgan was fully committed to that position, Destiny dropped the hammer with a simple question. Who negotiated that plan? The beauty of this approach is that it forces the Trump defender to either admit the truth or look completely dishonest when confronted with facts. Morgan tried to deflect at first, but when Destiny kept pressing with specific details about the congressional record, Morgan had no choice but to admit that Trump negotiated the Doha Agreement. Yeah, like once you cite actual congressional testimony, it becomes pretty hard to keep lying about what happened. This tactical approach of letting your opponent commit to a false position before revealing the evidence that destroys it is something that should be studied and replicated by anyone who wants to hold Trump supporters accountable for their lies and historical revisionism. But here's where the details of the Doha Agreement become absolutely crucial, and this is the part that most people don't understand about why Trump's Afghanistan policy was such a disaster. The agreement that Trump negotiated wasn't just a withdrawal plan, it was essentially a surrender document that gave the Taliban everything they wanted while abandoning America's Afghan allies. Trump agreed to withdraw all American troops by a specific date, release 5,000 Taliban prisoners, and legitimize the Taliban as a negotiating partner while completely sidelining the Afghan government that we'd been supporting for 20 years. Come on, when you negotiate directly with terrorists and ignore the legitimate government of Afghanistan, you're basically announcing that you don't care about your allies and you're willing to hand the country over to the people we've been fighting. And the prisoner release was particularly devastating because those 5,000 Taliban fighters went right back to the battlefield and helped overthrow the government that we'd spent trillions of dollars trying to build. The strategic stupidity of releasing enemy fighters while simultaneously weakening the government forces that were supposed to fight them reveals a level of foreign policy incompetence that should disqualify anyone from holding high office. Yet Trump supporters continue to defend this disaster while blaming Biden for following through on Trump's commitments. Now here's where Morgan's reaction becomes really telling, and this is the part that shows you how completely unprepared Trump defenders are when someone actually knows the facts. When Destiny started breaking down the specifics of what Trump did, the troop reductions, the prisoner releases, the timeline, Morgan just went silent. He couldn't defend any of it because the facts are so damning that there's no spin that makes Trump look good. The congressional testimony that Destiny cited shows that Trump reduced American forces from 13,500 to 2,500 before Biden even took office, which means the withdrawal was already well underway when the new administration started. And then Trump supporters want to act shocked when Biden followed through on the timeline that Trump had already negotiated. Are you kidding me? You can't set up a withdrawal, reduce the troops, negotiate with the Taliban, and then act surprised when the next president follows your plan. The visible shock on Morgan's face when confronted with these facts shows that many Trump defenders don't actually know the details of the policies they're defending. They just repeat talking points without understanding the underlying reality of what Trump actually did. The Joint Chiefs testimony that Destiny referenced is particularly devastating because it shows that military leaders knew Trump's plan was a disaster, but were ordered to implement it anyway. The former Joint Chiefs indicated that Trump planned the troop withdrawal as part of his political legacy, not because it was militarily sound or strategically wise. So when Trump supporters try to blame military leaders or Biden for the chaos that followed, they're ignoring the fact that this was Trump's plan from the beginning, and the military was just following orders. And here's what makes this even worse. Trump didn't just negotiate a bad deal. He actively undermined the Afghan government by releasing their enemies and legitimizing the Taliban as a political force. The 5,000 prisoners that Trump forced the Afghans to release weren't just random Taliban members. These were hardened fighters and leaders who immediately returned to the insurgency and helped plan the final offensive that toppled the government. When you force your allies to release their enemies and then act shocked when those enemies defeat your allies, that's not foreign policy failure. That's deliberate sabotage disguised as diplomacy. But here's where this gets even more disturbing, and this is the part that connects to Trump's broader pattern of foreign policy incompetence. The Doha Agreement wasn't just a bad deal. It was part of Trump's strategy of making dramatic gestures that look good politically, but create disasters for America's long-term interests. Just like his peace plans with North Korea that accomplished nothing, or his Ukraine strategy that his own senators are calling a surrender to Putin, Trump's Afghanistan deal was more about creating headlines than actually solving problems. He wanted to be able to say he ended the war in Afghanistan, so he negotiated a deal that guaranteed American withdrawal without securing any meaningful concessions from the Taliban, And when that deal predictably led to disaster, Trump and his supporters just blamed the next president for following through on commitments that Trump had already made. This pattern of creating short-term political victories that turn into long-term disasters is the defining characteristic of Trump's approach to foreign policy, and it's exactly what we're seeing repeated in his current presidency with his Ukraine peace plans and his military actions in Venezuela. The timing of this debate is also incredibly significant because it's happening right as Trump is back in office and dealing with multiple foreign policy crises of his own making. The Ukraine peace plan that Republican senators are calling a Russian wish list, the Venezuela military actions that are creating international incidents, the racist attacks on Somali immigrants. All of these controversies are happening while Trump supporters are still trying to rewrite history about Afghanistan. But when someone like Destiny comes along with actual documentation and congressional records, it becomes impossible to maintain these false narratives. Morgan getting destroyed in this debate is particularly satisfying because he represents this whole class of media personalities who have built their careers on defending Trump without actually knowing the facts about his policies. And let's talk about the viral nature of this clip because the fact that it's spreading so widely shows that people are hungry for this kind of accountability. The specific moment where Morgan's face just goes blank when he realizes he's been caught is resonating with viewers because it perfectly captures the experience of watching Trump defenders get confronted with reality. For years, these people have been able to get away with spreading false narratives because most of their opponents don't come prepared with specific facts and documentation. The broader political implications of this moment are also massive because it exposes how Trump's foreign policy record is actually much worse than his supporters want to admit. While they're busy trying to blame Biden for everything that went wrong in Afghanistan, they're ignoring the fact that Trump created the conditions for that disaster through his terrible negotiating and his willingness to abandon American allies. And this pattern is repeating itself in Trump's current presidency, where his peace plans and military actions are creating new problems while his supporters try to blame everyone else for the consequences. The Afghanistan debate with Morgan is going viral because it provides a perfect template for how to hold Trump accountable for his actual record instead of letting his defenders rewrite history. The fact that Morgan, who's supposed to be this tough interviewer, got so thoroughly demolished by a streamer also says something about the intellectual weakness of Trump's media defenders. So let's break this down into the key points that everyone needs to understand, because this Destiny versus Piers Morgan moment isn't just a viral debate clip. It's a perfect example of how Trump's foreign policy disasters are being covered up by his defenders and why fact-based accountability is so important in our current political environment. This story reveals how historical revisionism works in real time and shows what happens when someone actually comes prepared with documentation to counter false narratives. The implications of this moment extend far beyond just one embarrassing interview and point to fundamental problems with how political discourse operates in the Trump era. Point number one, and this is absolutely critical, Destiny completely destroyed Morgan's attempt to blame Biden for Afghanistan by citing specific congressional records that prove Trump negotiated the Doha Agreement and set up the entire withdrawal timeline. When Morgan tried to pin the Afghanistan disaster on Biden, Destiny asked the most devastating question possible. Who negotiated that plan? Donald Trump. And then he backed it up with actual evidence from November 2020 congressional testimony showing that Trump planned the troop withdrawal and reduced forces from 13,500 to 2,500 before Biden even took office. Come on. When you have documented proof that Trump created the timeline and negotiated directly with the Taliban, you can't just pretend that Biden invented the whole thing out of nowhere. Morgan's face going completely blank when confronted with these facts shows you how unprepared Trump defenders are when someone actually knows what they're talking about. And here's what makes this even more devastating. Destiny didn't just prove Trump negotiated the deal, he exposed how terrible the deal actually was. The Doha Agreement completely sidelined the Afghan government and treated the Taliban like a legitimate political party instead of the terrorist organization they actually are. Trump literally negotiated America's surrender in Afghanistan and then forced the Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners who went right back to fighting and helped overthrow the country. Yeah, like when you free enemy fighters and then act shocked when they defeat your allies, that's not Biden's fault. That's your own incompetence coming back to haunt you. The systematic nature of Trump's betrayal of Afghan allies through this agreement reveals someone who either didn't understand the consequences of his actions or didn't care about the people who had been fighting alongside American forces for 2 decades. Point number 2, and this is where the historical revisionism becomes impossible to ignore. This debate exposes the broader pattern of how Trump supporters try to rewrite history to avoid accountability for their guys' failures. Morgan's entire argument was based on the false narrative that Biden created the Afghanistan mess. conveniently ignoring that Trump negotiated the deal, set the timeline, reduced the troops, and freed Taliban fighters. This is classic Trump supporter behavior. Take credit for anything good while blaming Democrats for everything bad, even when the bad stuff is directly caused by Trump's own policies. And the fact that Morgan got so thoroughly demolished when confronted with actual facts shows how this strategy falls apart when someone comes prepared with documentation. Destiny citing specific congressional records and military testimony wasn't just good debate tactics, it was essential fact-checking that exposed years of lies about Afghanistan. When Trump supporters claim Biden was solely responsible for the withdrawal chaos, they're literally asking people to ignore Trump's own negotiations with the Taliban and pretend that history didn't happen. But when someone like Destiny shows up with the actual congressional record, that narrative collapses immediately. Are you kidding me? You can't negotiate a surrender to terrorists and then blame the next guy for following through on your commitments. The audacity of trying to rewrite such recent history while the documentation is readily available shows just how confident Trump supporters have become in their ability to manipulate public opinion through repetition of false narratives. Point number 3, and this is where Trump's foreign policy incompetence becomes undeniable. The details that Destiny exposed about the Doha Agreement show that Trump didn't just mismanage Afghanistan, he actively betrayed America's allies and handed victory to our enemies. The agreement required the U.S. to withdraw completely while giving the Taliban legitimacy as a negotiating partner and forcing the release of thousands of enemy fighters. Think about how insane that is. Trump negotiated directly with terrorists, ignored the Afghan government we'd been supporting for 20 years, and agreed to free Taliban leaders in exchange for basically nothing. The Joint Chiefs testimony that Destiny referenced shows that military leaders knew this was a disaster, but were ordered to implement Trump's political timeline regardless of strategic considerations. And the prisoner release was particularly devastating because those 5,000 Taliban fighters immediately returned to the battlefield and provided the manpower for the final offensive that toppled Afghanistan. When Trump supporters try to blame military leaders or Biden for the chaos that followed, they're ignoring the fact that Trump created the conditions for that disaster through his terrible negotiating and his willingness to abandon our allies. This isn't just about one bad policy decision. It's about a pattern of foreign policy incompetence that we're seeing repeated in Trump's current presidency, with his Ukraine surrender plans and his Venezuela military actions. The strategic incoherence of simultaneously weakening your allies while strengthening your enemies reveals someone who fundamentally doesn't understand how international relations work or doesn't care about the consequences of his actions for American interests and values. And point number 4, and this is the most important political issue, this viral moment shows how effective fact-based accountability can be when dealing with Trump defenders who rely on talking points instead of actual knowledge. Destiny's approach of letting Morgan dig himself into a false narrative and then destroying it with documented evidence provides a perfect template for how to counter Trump supporter lies in real time. The reason this clip is going viral isn't just because it's entertaining to watch Morgan get destroyed. It's because people are hungry for this kind of intellectual honesty and fact-checking in our political discourse. For too long, Trump supporters have been able to get away with spreading false narratives about foreign policy because most of their opponents don't come prepared with specific documentation and congressional records. But when someone shows up with actual evidence and forces them to confront the truth, their entire argument structure falls apart. And the timing of this is perfect because it's happening right as Trump is back in office creating new foreign policy disasters while his supporters try to whitewash his previous failures. The debate between Destiny and Morgan is resonating so widely because it shows that accountability is possible when someone is willing to do the work of actually researching the facts instead of just trading talking points. When Morgan had to admit that Trump negotiated the Doha Agreement, he was essentially admitting that years of blaming Biden were based on lies and historical revisionism. This kind of moment needs to happen more often if we're going to have any hope of maintaining truth and accountability in our political discourse. Now here's what comes next, and this is where it gets really important for everyone watching. This kind of fact-based accountability is going to become more and more important as Trump continues his presidency and his supporters try to rewrite history about his failures. We're going to see more moments like this where prepared opponents confront Trump defenders with actual documentation and force them to admit the truth. Meanwhile, Trump's current foreign policy disasters are going to create new opportunities for accountability, as his Ukraine peace plans and military actions create more problems for America's international standing. The choice for media personalities like Morgan is becoming clear. Either they start dealing with facts instead of just repeating Trump talking points, or they're going to keep getting embarrassed when they face opponents who actually know what they're talking about. This destiny takedown isn't just entertainment. It's a roadmap for holding Trump accountable with facts instead of just opinions. The era of consequence-free lying about Trump's record is officially over.